Okay, if you could please state your name, today's date, and time of the interview.
Okay. Hi, I'm Morgan Slusher. The date is June 28th, 2022. And what else was this?
Oh, it's just the location of the interview.
All right. So we're at CCBC Essex in the Arts and Humanities building studio.
Okay. And you're currently faculty at CCBC. What is your title at CCBC?
Okay, so I'm a professor of psychology, yes, and I'm also the faculty advisor for the Progressive Student Alliance.
Wonderful. And where did it all begin for you? Life. Now, I know that CCBC, or the Community College of Baltimore County, was originally Essex Community College. What was life like for you prior to you coming to Essex?
Okay. Well, I grew up on a farm in Missouri outside of Kansas City, so small town. Went to college at the University of Missouri at Rolla, which is also in a small town on the Ozarks, and I was totally in the closet during those times and everything, so it was a pretty, very closeted time for me. But then I went on to, for graduate work, to Rice University in Houston, Texas, and that's in Houston, and so that's the big city, and so that's where I sort of began to expand my horizons and came out of the closet and so forth. And so at Rice I was studying physics, and but when I came out of the closet I realized that there were other things I wanted to reconsider about my life as well, and physics was one of those. I was not really very happy in physics, and so I stayed at Rice, but I changed into psychology, and so I completed a master's and a doctorate in psychology. And what was really important for me at Rice was the LGBTQ student group there. Coming out of the closet, you're in the big city and so forth, but it was so important for me to have other students that I could relate to, have a group to come out, a support group and so forth. And so being involved in the student group there was really important for me. And so when I got out of Rice, I went for a year and taught at the main campus of the University of Missouri, back in Missouri, close to home. I taught for 1 year there. Then I taught at Skidmore College in upstate New York for 4 years, and I was the faculty advisor for the gay student group there. And so that was kind of my first experience, sort of being a faculty advisor for an LGBT organization, a student organization. And then I went on to the University of Michigan and did a couple years as a postdoctoral fellow there, doing research on LGBT elders. I was actually in a program in gerontology there, and so my focus, I decided to, they had a group called GLOW, Gays and Lesbians Older and Wiser, and so I did research with them, and so that was my main research focus at the University of Michigan. But then I realized that my passion was for teaching rather than research, and so that's how I decided to focus on trying to find further jobs in a community college as opposed to a research institution. And so I looked for jobs around the country, and I ended up at Essex Community College, and have been settled in here ever since.
That's really wonderful. And thank you for talking about GLOW. I had not heard of GLOW. At the time, was that a national thing, or was it just local?
No, at that time it was a local thing in sort of the Detroit/Ann Arbor area. But I think there are other groups called that around the country as well. So it's become kind of something, yeah.
Okay, wonderful. And then as CCBC faculty, when you were first coming, did you know if CCBC would be a right fit for you, being LGBT?
Well, one of the things I made sure to do was to talk about the research I'd been doing, like, in Michigan, and, the experiences I had it on my resume and so forth. So I tried to make it fairly clear that that was my focus, and that was, so that if that was an issue, that would probably filter out automatically. So I felt fairly confident that it would be a welcoming place. So yes, that factored into that.
Wonderful. And I understand your involvement with LGBTQ plus issues at CCBC has involved a couple different routes. The first primary one is the Essex Rainbow Club, which is now the Progressive Student Alliance. And then you're also involved in a committee for LGBTQ plus advocacy, support, and inclusion for the faculty, known as Classy. In regards to the Rainbow Club, how did you get involved with that? Where did you meet someone?
Yeah, it was very fortuitous. As it happened, my office, when I first got here, was immediately across the hall from another faculty colleague named Jim Conrad, and he was an anthropology professor, and he was the faculty advisor for the Rainbow Club at that time. And so he and I got to be friends because, of course, we had offices across the hall from each other, and so he, of course, invited me to participate in the Rainbow Club things and sort of get involved in that. And so it was probably maybe 3 or 4 years after I arrived here that Jim retired. And so I think there was a period of time where we were co-advisors, and then when he retired, I became the advisor for the group. And so, yeah, it was very, very fortunate. I just happened to be right in the right place to get involved in that.
Absolutely.
Just wondering, what year was it exactly?
Okay, so I came to CCBC in 1995. And so probably the earliest records I could find of my involvement was around 2001. But also, we didn't have the technology we have now, finding emails and things like that. When I arrived at CCBC, we didn't have computers on our desk. There was no internet access. There were no emails going out and so forth. So the earliest records I find of things that are printed on a computer and so forth are 2001. So probably my involvement with the Rainbow Club started probably around 1995. I mean, I started pretty much immediately as I got here. I met Jim and got involved in it. But probably he retired, I would guess, in like 98, 99, something like that. And certainly by 2000 and 2001, I was, actively involved in planning programs and things like that.
And do you have any flyers or pictures from those first 6 years?
When I got to CCBC, we weren't provided with computers. I brought my own computer from graduate school. It was an old Macintosh. It was brick square things.
Absolutely.
And I had one of those printers that had the cogs on it that every line would go across. Yes, do that. So I don't think I do have much.
And that's okay.
from
That's
that time,
perfectly
'cause
fine.
I'm trying to,
Like I said, 2000 and 2001 were
Record.
kind of light years. Everything started to switch over at that point. Even in my high school, that's when that was 2000, 2001 is when you started to actually use computers for like research programs and different things of that sort.
Because here's a memo. This is our budget for 2000, 2001.
2002.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Wow.
I don't know.
Is it recording again?
Yeah.
Okay, we're good. I'm just making sure.
Yeah, I don't have anything.
We had a larger budget in 2002 than we have now.
Yes. We had a budget up to 6,000 one time.
It's just incredible.
Yeah. Anyway, so.
All right, you guys are good to
Okay.
back up whenever.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
So what are some events that either became regular programs for the Rainbow Club or ones that really stand out to you?
Okay. Some of the things that became regulars to me, one that I thought was really important was I would almost every year schedule some people from PFLAG to come speak with us. PFLAG is Parents, Friends, and Family of Lesbians and Gays. And they have chapters around, but they had a chapter up in Bel Air, Maryland, that was the closest to here. Those were really active. And so almost every year I'd have a panel of them coming. It'd usually be like 3 or 4 parents or family members who would come in. And I really thought that was important because we had a lot of students in the club who were not out to their parents and so forth. And so to have that kind of interaction with supportive parents and to learn about PFLAG, and we also got a lot of literature from PFLAG and so forth when we pass out at different events and so forth. So that was always an important one for me to have on a regular basis. Another thing we tended to do on a regular basis was have a program each year dealing somehow with religion, because I think religion's also a challenging issue for a lot of people. So we had a minister from an independent Catholic church, which is a Catholic church that's not affiliated with the Roman Catholic Church. The independent Catholic churches are much more LGBTQ friendly. He was a gay minister from that church, or a priest from that church. So he came and talked to us one time. We've had several times speakers come from the Metropolitan Community Church, which is the LGBTQ sort of primary focus church in Baltimore. So ministers from them came and spoke with us. So that was something I would try to do on a regular basis. We always had receptions at the beginning of each semester. That was sort of our, kick things off things. So I'd have a fall rainbow reception and a spring rainbow reception, and that was always exciting. I mean, we'd always have lots of food. In those days, we could have lots of food, and so there were times of those I had students, hanging from the rafters practically. We'd have like 30 or 40 students showing up for those receptions, so that was a lot of fun. So that would always be the kickoff of the semester, and then at the end of the semester, we would have a holiday party at the end. So we did some. So the holiday parties were fun. Those were, not serious programs. They were, again, food. We'd have music. We'd have art projects. I think. Let's see. Do I have that here? We would make holiday cards. Big holiday cards like this that we would then hang up over the stairs on in the Ramotka Center, in the Student Center. Happy holidays from the Rainbow Club, and we'd have them all decorated up and everything. So that was a lot of fun. Everybody always liked the art projects. And then in the spring, we would have a picnic. So we'd be outside, and we could sort of, if weather permitting at least, and have a picnic and so forth. So that was a regular thing on our schedule. So those were some of the things that were kind of every year we'd sort of figure, okay, we have to do this, or we want to do this type of things. And then there were various kinds of special events that came up. One was a program called Queer Core. That was an LGBTQ arts and performance festival that we had one year. And so we had, there's actually an adjunct faculty member here at CCBC. She goes by, her performance name is Queen Earth. And so she kind of helped organize that. And it was an open mic type of thing. So she performed, and other students performed. And then we had an art project going where students could create a painting. And I think I do have that here. Hold on. So the students created this painting that you can sort of see here, and we then it came out, I thought, so beautifully that we decided to approach the college to see if we could have it permanently displayed. And so I'm happy to say it continues to be on permanent display. It's outside the board room here on the CCBC Essex campus in the administration building. And we had a dedication ceremony with it. Queen Earth performed for that too. And so that was a big deal. And so that was really special that we did that. A couple of the big things that we started doing after a few years, this probably began around in the early 1910s, I guess. So we would have what we call dragucation. And dragucation, we had dragucation events probably 5 or 6, 7 times different years over that kind of in the 2010s. And one year we had actually a RuPaul's Drag Race queen who participated in that. Jessica Wilde was her name. And then we had local drag queens. There was one of my favorite there's one named Anita Minute, who served as our sort of MC for several of them, and she's a hoot. And so that was good. And we always that was always a fundraiser as well. We would raise money. We raised money one year for the Trevor Project. We raised money one year for the community center in Baltimore. We raised for several different charitable organizations. So that was both a fun, drag, but it was drag-ucation. So it was a drag show followed by a panel discussion. So the drag queens would talk about, what it means to be a drag queen and so forth. And so those were a lot of fun, and the fundraising. So those were really special events. And then several times we had dances. We did a couple kinds of dances. We would oftentimes do like what we call the Spring Pride Ball. And so we had several editions of that, usually in the cafeteria here in the college center. And then one year we also collaborated with the History Club, and we did what was called the Decades Dance. And so they would do dances from like the 20s and the 30s and 40s and all these kind of things. So it was a collaboration between the History Club and then the Rainbow Club, which I always like doing collaboration. That's always good to try to pull in more people and sort of preach beyond the choir too a little bit. Get more participation for people. So those are special events. So those are some of the things that kind of stand out to me as things that we did over the years. Yeah.
Do you know why some of the queer core and some of the other, I guess there would be sub-programs of the Rainbow Club aren't pre-pandemic?
Right.
Why did they kind of seem to fizzle out, or why are they?
Well, unfortunately, in the later years, we didn't have the 30 or 40 people hanging from the rafters when we had our receptions, things like that. The membership in the club dwindled. And so it was harder to put these things on. You had dance, and so forth. If you only have, 4 or 5 people active in the group putting on a dance doesn't necessarily make sense, or these other kinds of things. So I think the ambitiousness of our programming kind of reflected the activity of the group. And so kind of in I would have to say, kind of the heyday or the prime of the Rainbow Club was around in the early 1910s. That was also another thing that we did a lot in that time. That was a time when Tammy Jackson was involved in the group as one of our leaders, and she and her wife had a home nearby. Actually, it's closer to the Dundalk campus, but it was kind of in our part of the county at least. And they welcomed people into their home for things. And so not only did we have events on campus, we also had potlucks at their house and things like that, which I could never really do myself because I don't live locally. I live in Washington, D.C., so I couldn't really have that kind of thing myself. But it was really nice to have people who could host things in their home during that time. So I think that contributed to the activity of the group. So those kinds of things, I think, were the things that kind of kept the group active and so forth. But then we could have more ambitious programming. And so a few other things I should mention also. So other things that became sort of standard things that we would do besides just programming for our meetings, we would also, every year, we would have a table for National Coming Out Day. So we would have tables, we would have literature out there from both the Rainbow Club as well as the PFLAG and places like that. We also had this is just one of my favorite little handouts we used to give out. It's kind of a takeoff, kind of switching around the things that people tend to ask gay people, switching it around for straight people. So, for example, the first question is, have you ever considered, for example, what do you think caused your heterosexuality? Or when and how did you decide that you were heterosexual? And so that was always a fun thing to pass out, and it would always get a reaction from people. And most people understood it. A few people said, "What is this?" But a lot of people understood it and sort of understood the point of that. And then we also had every year the Day of Silence that we also participated in. And so that was a different kind of event because National Coming Out Day tend to be more like active and loud, whereas National Day of Silence, of course, the whole idea is to stay silent. And so we put a table out on the quad, and we would have literature out there and so forth, but people could also pick up cards that says, here's why I'm being silent today, basically because, the LGBTQ community has been silenced, and so this is to recognize that. And we also had stickers that we got from a group called Glisten, these Day of Silence stickers, so you could put this over your mouth, so you could so be silent that way. So those were events that we had on a regular basis. So there were a variety of things that, in the heyday of the group, we would always just plan these things out, each year. And at the end of the Day of Silence, we also had a Breaking the Silence event. So that would be like 2 or 3 in the afternoon or whatever, as students were finishing up classes. So we would have an event where we'd get up and we'd yell and scream and bang on drums, and we also, some people wrote poems and did poetry reading and things like that. And so that was always a fun thing too. So we had a pretty robust schedule of things that we would do pretty much every year.
Very robust. Now, were a lot of these programs faculty-led or student-led, or was it a mixture?
It was usually a mixture. I would say, well, I did play a pretty active role in programming during that time. I was always happy when I had more student involvement, but there were times, even in those active days, where I would start off the year with nothing, basically, and I would go around, put up flyers and say, hey, we're at the Rainbow Club, and we're having a reception, we're having our Rainbow reception, and start from scratch. And so I was never quite sure every year, what I would have to work with in terms of student leadership. But yeah, I would say that more so at a community college like this, I think the faculty almost have to take a more active role because you do have students that are sort of coming new all the time and so forth. I know when I was an undergraduate at the University of Missouri, faculty advisors were kind of in the background. It was basically student-run organizations, and the faculty advisor was there to kind of sign off on, forms or whatever. I've had to really be a more active, planner and so forth to make sure things kept going. But within that, then, as much as possible, we had students involved in, actually planning the actual programs.
And then speaking of faculty, I would love to hear a little bit more about the history of Classy. How did that come into being a group? And then what are some initiatives that you've tried to promote or initiate within Classy?
Okay. All right, so for many years, basically the advocacy for LGBTQ issues at CCBC was all through the student organizations, through the Rainbow Club at Essex and the equivalent groups at the other campuses. But CCBC does have, I think at that time it was called the multicultural student, the Office of Multicultural, something about multicultural office, that does have a responsibility for fostering multicultural issues and so forth. And so at some point along the way, they hired Patricia Quintero Hall, who was given the responsibility of sort of having within her sort of portfolio of responsibilities promoting LGBTQ issues. And so she came to me basically, and we had a discussion saying, it really shouldn't fall entirely on students and student organizations to be promoting all this stuff. It really should come somehow officially from the college. It should come down as opposed to always being pushed up. And so that's why we sort of started, okay, so we need to have something that is the college's entity to do this, that it's not the student's responsibility. And so that was the origin of what the first name, and I do have, I like to name things, I like cute names for things, and so I actually proposed the first name for that committee as SMAC, which was the Sexual Minorities Advocacy Committee. And so for many years that committee operated as SMAC, which I thought was cute, but eventually people kind of rebelled against that. But for many years it worked for us, and so that was the beginning of having through what is now the Office of Intercultural Engagement, and Patricia Quintero Hall working with me to sort of promote the various things that the college should be doing. one of the things that came out of that was the beginning of safe zone training. And there was, I have here. But there was, we began to say, okay, we need to have something where we start to sort of gather allies. We have to sort of train people. How do we have a supportive environment? And we need to have training for that and so forth. So, so that was one of the first initiatives that came out of that. Matt Gaynor, I think, was the first chair of that committee, and so he helped advocate for all that, and he was a good ally. And so, working basically with me and with them and so forth, we started some of these initiatives. That group, it was also sort of important for pushing things like a pronoun policy for the college to sort of advocate. And I was also on the college senate at the time, so I brought up the idea of a pronoun policy and sort of a preferred name policy that the CCBC should have a policy to recognize people's preferred names and the pronouns that people use and so forth. And so I worked together with Classy to kind of promote that. Also, again, as I was on the college senate, sort of push that policy through. So that was something we worked on. We worked on various things for how to designate through the college's computer systems and so forth, how to let people know people's preferred names and so forth, the technology side of it and so on. So that group has sort of been moving along, but in more recent years, it's actually grown. It's actually progressed a lot in the last few years, which has been really heartening. And so a few years ago, people said they didn't like the name SMAC anymore. And so we sort of opened it up to possible new names. And once again, I was the one who sort of came up with a new name. There were various people offered various ideas, but we came up with Classy, which I thought was a nice name, and sort of got the point across. And so I think that's worked well for us. So what's happened most recently is that Classy has grown now to the point where we do have enough allies and have enough members of Classy and so forth that we can start to splinter off into subcommittees. And so we now have subcommittees that are looking at things like we call it this Classy enforcers, to how do we sort of make sure that the policies that the college has in place, like the preferred name policy, how do we make sure that's actually implemented? Make sure that the computer systems and so forth recognize the preferred names and that. So that is that's the one group that's working on one thing. I also brought to the attention of the committee that bathrooms should be more inclusively labeled. I happen to be a big theater fan. I go to a lot of theaters and so forth, and I see a lot of theaters who have bathrooms that are labeled, you are welcome to use the bathroom of your gender identity, or things like that. And so I said, well, why doesn't CCBC have that? Why aren't we? And so I tend to think that way. I see things other places. I think, well, why can't CCBC do that? And so I brought that to the committee, and so that's also the enforcer subcommittee is working on that project of trying to get more label. And I love that particular project because I think that is something that's so visible to people. Everybody has to use the bathroom, and so if you walk in and say, oh well, CCBC says that you can use the bathroom that you identify with, that's a message right there for everybody. So I like that. So I hope that project continues to move forward. Another thing I've been advocating for a long time through Classy is to develop an affinity group for faculty and staff, because that's one of the things that has been a bit frustrating at CCBC, is not to sort of, I know through casual and sort of in informal ways, who might be fellow members of the LGBTQ community, but we don't have anything formalized to sort of advocate, to sort of network and socialize and throw ideas around and so forth. And so that's finally gotten off the ground as well, to try to have that. And so, and this archive project is something that I have thought of for years. I thought, okay, I'm not going to be here forever, and we've had a lot of things going on. I would hate to see all this sort of, I don't want to throw it all in the dumpster when I leave, and so so it's been really exciting and important for me to have this archive project growing the way it is, and so that's been another thing. So those are the kinds of things that I've been sort of able to do with Classy's support, and so that's been terrific.
That's all very, very wonderful. And I know that's just kind of the very tip of all of the programs that you've initiated or worked on here. One of the things that you mentioned was policies in regards to the name change, and then also the inclusive restrooms and facilities. Were there any policies along the way that maybe concerned you, or were there policies that you pushed for CCBC that maybe weren't statewide or nationally wide?
Not really that come to mind. I haven't really focused too much on things like HR policies and things like that. That hasn't really been too much of my attention. It might have been more of an issue if I were married or have other things like that, but that hasn't been the case. So, so no, I haven't really. That's probably other people have probably taken more of a lead on that than I have. People.
And you shared too that you were very open about your research coming in, so you knew that the Community College of Essex was at least going to be welcoming,
Right.
And you were able to make connections. That makes a lot of sense.
And I've been fortunate, the colleagues I've worked with have been very supportive, and and I do, all the work that I'm talking about, that all is considered a part of my college service and everything. So CCBC has been very good about, recognizing all that.
And then a part of your college service, were you a part of the Community Book Connection?
Yes, so that started maybe 12, 15 years ago, something like that, the Community Book Connection. So the Community Book Connection is, of course, that there's a common book, a community book every year that is selected. It's voted on by the students and faculty. Everybody at CCBC gets a chance to vote for the community book for the year. And so I've sort of taken it upon myself to try every year to figure out some LGBTQ connection to whatever the book might be. And sometimes that's been more challenging than others, and I haven't necessarily done it every year, but on at least on quite a few occasions I've been able to make those connections. And and I usually do it, because I haven't talked about History Month yet, but I usually try to do it in connection with LGBTQ History Month. So let me just back up a little bit and talk about History Month, and then I'll get back to the Community Book Connection stuff. So for many years, CCBC has recognized Pride Month in the summer. CCBC has various ways of recognizing months. There's some places on the computer and so forth they can put up a picture or something like that. And so so CCBC was recognizing Pride Month in June, but that didn't strike me as being terribly useful, since there isn't much going on at CCBC in June, and there's nobody around, and we're not doing programming and so forth. But I was aware that nationally there is LGBT History Month that is recognized in October. And I thought, well, that's a much more useful month for us to do things in October. So so I think that was also something we approached through Classy, say, can we get CCBC to recognize October as LGBT History Month? And we did get a little pushback on that at first, because basically there was like, well, you get 1 month. You can have June or you can have October. And so I said, well, but they're different things. Pride's in the summer, that's, celebration and so forth. But the History Month is the educational aspect of it and so forth. And so we got a little pushback on it for a couple of years, but then they kind of went along with it. So we haven't had any problems more recently. So every October, there are places on the CCBC website and so forth that recognize History Month. And so what we've done for History Month is we try to have programming. So it's a particular focus. We try to have programming, of course, throughout the year, but particularly in October, we try to have, a more greater focus on LGBTQ programming during that month. So one of the things I've sort of set out to do is tie that together with the Community Book Connection. Because the Community Book Connection, first off, has money. It's a program that is funded, and so if I want to do a program, they have money to support that, and so I've done things. Well, a couple that stand out. One is a few years ago we did a book that focused on indigenous people and Native American issues and so forth, and so I invited a Two-Spirit speaker to speak to the college, and so a fellow named Marlon Fixico, and he's actually spoken to a couple. He actually spoke. Further, maybe like 8 or 10 years ago, the Community Book Connection focused on environmental issues, and so I sort of felt like Native Americans have a different perspective on environmental issues and nature and kind of the connection to nature. And so I actually invited him to speak then. So that was the first time he spoke to us, and that was actually in person, yes, because that was back when we did those things in person. He came to campus. He was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, so it wasn't a hard thing for him to come here on campus and speak. And then more recently, we had a book that dealt with Native American issues. And so I went back to him again. I said, okay, this time, let's talk about this issue, particularly the two-spirit aspects of it. So that was one that sort of stands out. He's been here twice for that. And another speaker just this last year, the community book focused more on sort of mindfulness. And so I had a woman who is based out of California, but now we're doing things virtually, of course, the last couple of years in the pandemic, so I can get speakers from anywhere in the world. And so she was a specialist on mindfulness within the LGBTQ community, and so she spoke on the particular what LGBTQ people bring to kind of the mindfulness perspective and mindfulness movement and so forth. And so she gave a wonderful talk on that. So, so most years, I try to find some connection during October to have a community book connection program that is also a Rainbow Club or now a Progressive Student Alliance program and so forth to try to bring it all together. So that's been mine.
That's wonderful. And then speaking of connections beyond CCBC, because you talked about we've been in a virtual world. Have you had opportunities to take CCBC students to LGBTQ plus events outside of the college?
Yeah, actually I have. It has been really exciting also. The most ambitious thing I ever tried, and this was a year we did really push the student life for more budget. We actually had a budget of about $6,000 that year because I wanted $2,000 basically to take 2 students to a conference in Portland, Oregon. And so every year the National Gay Lesbian Task Force does a conference they call Creating Change. And it moves around. But the year that I was interested in doing this, it was in Portland, Oregon, and so I pushed for me to take 2 students to that, and they approved it. So they sent all 3 of us to Portland, Oregon, and that was terrific. I mean, it was a great experience for the students, and to be a part of a national conference like that, and it was really advocating for advocacy and activism and so forth, and so they got a lot out of that, and so that was really cool. And then there's been another program, another organization called Out for Work, which is headquartered out of Washington, D.C., and so they've had annual conferences, and so at least twice, maybe even 3 times, I've taken students from here to that conference, and that's terrific too, because it's really focused on LGBTQ people in the workplace, and that, so to sort of help people kind of understand the issues around that and so forth. So that's been a lot of fun taking students to that as well.
And then there's also another group called Be More Proud. Can you share a little bit about Be More Proud?
Yeah, Be More Proud's also had its heyday and no longer exists currently. But But it seems like periodically people get this idea, and they always think it's a new idea, of course, that we should have some kind of coalition of all the colleges around the Baltimore area. All our LGBTQ organizations should work together, network with each other. The students can meet each other from different colleges and so forth. And so periodically that idea sort of pops up. But about probably 10, 12 years ago, it actually came into being, at least for a time. And that was an example of something that really does require a person to take leadership of it. And in this case, it was somebody at Towson University. Towson does have the resources. They have an LGBTQ center, and they have an actual director for that center. And so the woman who was in that position at that time really took it upon herself to say, okay, we want to make this happen. And so she really took the horns and contacted the various colleges around and so forth, including myself at CCBC. And so we created this organization called Be More Proud. And and so it included Johns Hopkins, Towson, Loyola, Stevenson, all the major colleges, in the Baltimore area, and CCBC was the only community college that was involved. So I was very happy with that. I made sure. I sort of take the attitude. The analogy I like to use is, say like in a dog park. The little dogs, the big dogs, they don't recognize each other. They're all just dogs. They play with each other and so forth. I feel the same way about CCBC. We can play with Johns Hopkins. We can play with all these other colleges. If we're the only community college there, well, then we're going to be there. And so I feel like, our students deserve the best just like everybody else. And so I've really been, wanting to make sure that if there's something going on among the colleges in Baltimore, I want us to be a part of it as well. So Be More Proud was really very successful for probably 6 or 8 years. And they had a conference every year. The conferences were several times at Towson, a couple times at Johns Hopkins, once at UMBC. So they sort of spread them around. Once at Stevenson had it. There was one point where one of the student leaders, whoever the student leader was at that time of the Rainbow Club, suggested we could post it here at CCBC. I kind of did not think we were ready to do that because I knew how much work would go into that. And that was one of those times when we didn't have 40 people hanging off the walls. And, I was dealing with 5 or 6 students in the group. And I thought, no, I don't think we're ready to host it. But we always attended. We always make sure we were there, and sometimes we had programs that we would present and things like that. But that was really good because it was an opportunity for our students to hobnob with UMBC and the Johns Hopkins people and everything, and so I think that was great. So those conferences would be a day-long conference, and so they would have programming. They would have a dance in the evening and so forth. So that was really great. And unfortunately, the woman that was at Towson who spearheaded it moved on elsewhere. And so then the person who took over from her really did not see that as a priority for them. And so it kind of went to Johns Hopkins for a while. Johns Hopkins, of course, also has the resources for a center and so forth. And so Johns Hopkins kind of spearheaded it for maybe 2 or 3 years, and then it kind of lost steam. The last conference that Be More Proud had was at UMBC, and that was probably 5 or 6 years ago at this point. And so since then, it's been dormant. I understand that somebody is trying to revive something similar now. So I just heard about that last weekend at the Pride Parade last weekend. So we'll see what that actually comes to be. I haven't. I want to find out more about that and see if we can get involved with it. But
that would be very exciting. I think it's important for students at the community college to have those connections and to have that networking with the universities. I know for myself, it was important through some of the other the programs, the Mellon Scholars, who's funded us,
absolutely,
and the Honor Society and things of that sort. So I think it's so important, especially for LGBTQ students, to know here's a warm transfer. You have friends, you have community.
Mm-hmm. And also through that was actually how we got first involved in doing the Pride Parade. Because now, I was sort of looking back through my notes, and it seems like we did have some kind of participation in Pride prior to that. I found something notes like in our budget for the Rainbow Club back to 2001, but we must have just been attending or something. I don't think we marched, but around 2009 or 2010, I think it was 2009, when Be More Proud was going and Towson was leading it, they were going to have a contingent in the parade, and so partly through this connection through Be More Proud, I said, well, we're going to be in the parade too then. And so that was the first time we had a contingent in the parade, and we marched alongside Towson and all that. And so that's become another of those things that almost every year CCBC has also now had a contingent in the Pride Parade, including all the way up to 2 days before I'm recording this, and so that's been really exciting too. And that's another thing where I think it's a really good thing for our students to have that opportunity to get out there and have people cheering for them and march down the street and make noise and all those things. It's I think been a great thing too.
I do agree. I think that's very important to have those in-person connections, which is actually the next segment that I wanted to discuss was how did the pandemic affect the students? How did it affect you? We were all thrown into it together. Right. What did that do to the Rainbow Clubs or the PSA at that point?
Yeah, so, well, it really forced us into virtual, of course. We've tried to maintain it, but it's been a struggle. Maybe would this be a good time to sort of talk about the Rainbow Club, the PSA transition? So yes. So the Rainbow Club itself, as I was saying earlier, we kind of had our heyday in the early 1910s and so forth. We had lots of people involved. It seemed like after that, for whatever reasons, maybe it's progress. Maybe people don't feel like they need this as much or whatever. But it was harder and harder to get students involved. And so our numbers were dwindling, and I don't think the Rainbow Club was unique in that. There were other organizations that were also having dwindling membership and so forth, and so a couple of faculty colleagues came to me and said, we're thinking about maybe trying to combine groups together. And specifically, it was Ingrid Sabio, who was the faculty advisor for the Black Student Union, and Kim Jensen, who was the faculty advisor for the Students for Social Justice. And they were the two people who kind of probably most promoted this idea. They came to me as the Rainbow Club. They came to Dawn Greeley, who's the faculty advisor for the History Club, and said, what would you think of combining our group together into a combined group? We're all struggling for members. Maybe if we combine it all together, we'll have more people again. And so beginning in the fall of 2018 that actually occurred. So the Rainbow Club ceased to exist in 2018. Along with those other groups, and we formed what became known then. We kind of tossed around ideas for names and so forth, and we eventually settled on the Progressive Student Alliance, the PSA. And so since 2018, the PSA has been the student organization on the Essex campus that has had the responsibility and sort of the purview of LGBTQ issues, along with other issues, any kind of social justice issues, basically, more broadly defined. So we started off, we had, of course, in-person, in 2018, of course, we were having in-person meetings and so forth, and but it never really took off wildly popular as far as the number of students, but we would have meetings with maybe 12 or 15 students coming, something like that. So it was moving along, and I made sure the LGBTQ stuff was always kind of, represented, so that, it wasn't sort of lost in the mix. But there is, I think, kind of an issue of when you don't have a specific focus, if it's too broad, you kind of lose focus sometimes. And so, but we were, I think, reasonably successful going into the pandemic or before the pandemic. But then once the pandemic came along, we went to Zoom or Teams meeting, kind of whatever worked for us at the time. And it's been a struggle since then. We've been fortunate to have some good student leaders and so forth, but and we have some people who can participate virtually who wouldn't participate otherwise because they come from other places, from the Dundalk area or Catonsville. Some people come from, you're not geographically limited, so that's been an advantage. But for whatever reason, it still has not bloomed into a large number of people. Typical PSA meetings we've been having, anywhere from maybe 4 or 5 to maybe a dozen, or we've had a few meetings that have really gotten maybe 15 or 20 students coming, but it's been a challenge. And so I think there is that lack of personal interactions. Many of these students I've never met, in person, and they haven't met each other. I think that's another thing. There's no social connections. For those who want to join these kind of things for social connections, there just isn't that virtually. So, and we're not having picnics and parties and food. There's nothing that sort of draws students in more than food. Food's very potent in terms of drawing students in. So I think the pandemic has been a struggle for us.
What are some ways that faculty or students or alumni can get involved going forward?
Well, I think, all the things I've been talking about are certainly available to everybody. And now, in this current virtual world, it's accessible to everybody from wherever. So we certainly welcome, people into the PSA. We welcome people into Classy. People can take the Safe Zone training and become a Safe Zone ally if they're faculty or staff. There is discussion of how we can possibly do Safe Zone trainings for students as well, perhaps somehow, to have student allies. So that's not something that's currently happening, but may happen in the future. So I think there are many opportunities for people who want to get involved through all those things that we already have going.
And do you have like a specific goal or any kind of events for students for the next year? Should they look out for you said October is History Month?
Right, October's History Month. Well, so I'm working on something for History Month for the Community Book Connection, which again, this year the theme is more environmental issues. So I've been exploring there is sort of an LGBTQ environmental movement that seems to take a perspective that, LGBTQ people bring a certain kind of perspective to environmental issues because of the history of discrimination and so forth that sort of view nature differently. And so I'm trying to put together some kind of a program on that. Haven't gotten that all lined up quite yet, but that's in progress. And beyond that, I don't have any specific things for people to look at for right now, but my hope is to continue with some of the kinds of things. Some of the things we've had for History Month through Classy, because Classy kind of has taken over the responsibility for History Month. In fact, there was another subcommittee of Classy, along with other subcommittees, that is the History Month subcommittee now. So that's nice to see too. Now there's actually some people who actually it's their responsibility. But we've done some really good programs the last few years, particularly in the kind of virtual environment of like a faculty, staff, and students talking about their coming out experiences and so forth. We've had senior administrative people from the college talking about it, because we do have members of the community who are in the administration of the college, and we've had them speak to these programs as well as having students and faculty speak. And so those kinds of things I think we'll continue to have again. And there's, we try to have film. Well, we did at one point have a film festival, so that's another possibility, which, that can work pretty well in a virtual type of environment to do films and things like that. So.
And is Connect Fest every fall and
every spring? Yes.
just share a little bit more about Connect Fest,
Okay,
just for
sure.
students who may be up and coming?
Absolutely. Yeah, Connect Fest is probably our best recruiting opportunity of the year. There is one at the beginning of the semester in the fall and beginning of the semester in the spring. Fall's the bigger one, I guess you'd say, because more people are sort of coming in the fall. And usually it's nicer weather. We can usually have it outside on the quad. And so we set up a table, and when the Rainbow Club still existed, the banner that's behind me here was the banner we would have across the front of the table. And I would also, I would rainbow it out as much as possible. I had a rainbow umbrella that we would have up, and I would have all kinds of rainbow stuff out there, so that you couldn't miss us. We always had the most festive table at the Connect Fest, and that's where we would tell people about our programs, tell people about our kind of events, sign people up, try to get email addresses and things to get people involved, and we'd usually plan to have our reception like the week after that. So we would time the reception, the fall reception, the spring reception, to be right after the Connect Fest, so that we would try to get the new people in.
Okay, my last question for today. I know we've talked about affinity groups for the students, and we've talked about affinity groups for faculty. Are there any affinity groups specifically for the alumni?
No, there's not. So that's an interesting question to add. Hadn't really thought about that, but no, we haven't. We haven't thought about a LGBTQ alumni group. So
That might be something to put on the book.
File that away.
All right. Well, Professor Slusher, we thank you so much for your time today. This has just been a wonderful program. Thank you for making it a thing. I mean, you had the idea, and now we are making it happen. So I'm grateful. Thank you so much for your time.
That is so exciting for me as well. Thank you for having me.